Hey, what's going on? It's Dewey here, and today guys I do an updated cell phone collection video as of early December 2019, and our total guys are 125 phones. And yeah guys, so let's go start with the first phone, which is the My X7. It works perfectly fine, and yeah guys, it is unlocked, and yeah, it has a cracked display, but it works fine. And it's also T-Mobile. Next up is one of two more Razr V3s. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it's unlocked as well. Next up is the Samsung S8 X60. This one works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it's unlocked and everything. Perfectly working. Next up is the Samsung B300. This one works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it's in mint condition, but it's locked, but it works fine. Next up is one and two Samsung 357s. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine and is in pristine condition, or say mint condition. And yeah guys, it works fine. Next up is the Nokia 2630. This one works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it is unlocked and everything, perfectly working. Next up is one of the three Samsung S850s. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine. However though, with this one, it is locked. But it works perfectly fine. Next up is the Sony Ericsson Spiral, or the Sony Ericsson W100i. It works totally fine. It's unlocked. Next up is the Alcatel One Touch 108. This one works perfectly fine. However though, most of these buttons are very hard to press, and it's locked to cousin phone. And yeah guys, sometimes the back does that, but yeah, the black in this one is white. It works. But it's locked to cousin phone, but it works fine. Next up is the Alcatel One Touch 2012G. This one doesn't turn on at all. And yeah guys, it's broken, but it's in pretty good condition, as you can see, but it doesn't work. Next up is the ZTE KIS Plus. This one works perfectly fine, except the back speaker on this one doesn't work, but the front one is working fine. And it's unlocked. And it's also a T-Mobile. Next up is one of two Nokia 2760s. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine. However though, the mini display in this one doesn't work. However though, the front display is working fine. So yeah, it works. Next up is one of the three Samsung Galaxy Youngs. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine and it's in pristine condition. So yeah, pretty nice. Next up is the Sony Ericsson T310. This one's with orange and it works totally fine. However though, it just needs a new battery. So yeah, it works fine. Next up is the Nokia X300. This one works totally fine, but it is indeed security code locked. But it works fine. Next up is the Sony Ericsson K550i. I'm not too sure if this one even works, but we'll just find out if it does. But maybe it does. Next up is one of the three Samsung 335s. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, yeah, pretty nice device. Seeing as this guy, we have like three of those. So yeah. Next up is the Sony Ericsson J210i. This one works perfectly fine. However though, it is locked to an unknown carrier. Next up, it is the Samsung Stratus. This one works perfectly fine, and it's unlocked. And this one is also unlocked, this phone. Next up is the Alcatel One Touch 1016. This one works perfectly fine, and it's unlocked. However though, the display in this one is negative, which needs to be swapped, but it works. Next up is the HTC Explorer. This one works perfectly fine, except the DD test this one doesn't work. but it works. As you can see, the details, it doesn't work on this one, but it works. Next up is the Alcatel One Touch Mini. This one works fine, except there's a broken LCD. However though, the digitizer still works. And it's also unlocked. This one's also unlocked and unlocked. Next up is the Sony Ericsson T610. This one works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it's a pretty nice device, and it's also unlocked. Also, this device is on T-Mobile. This one. Next up is the Alcatel Smart. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. It's in mint condition except it's a cracked display. So as you can see, it works. Next up is 182 Samsung mode sliders. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine and is in pristine condition. Next up is the LG T35. This one works perfectly fine and it's unlocked. This window is locked to T-Mobile and this one's unlocked. Next up is the Samsung Coconut. This one works perfectly fine. However though, it is locked to T-Mobile, but it works perfectly fine. Next up is the Nokia C31 Touch and Type. It works perfectly fine and it's unlocked. The only issue about this one, and that is the camera doesn't work, but it works perfectly fine. Next up is the Nokia 2610. This one works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it is unlocked. Here is the other of my E250s, the second one. This one is fully working, except the flex span's broken. So when you slide upwards, sometimes it's gonna get like a white display. And yeah guys, it's actually unlocked too, but it works. Next up is 182, a Samsung Galaxy S4. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine. And it's unlocked. I also swapped the displays too. Next up is the Alcatel One Touch 106. This one works perfectly fine, but it is locked to Cosmo phone. It works though. Next up is the Sony Ericsson Xperia X8. One of my favorite phones. It works. Here's the other of my Samsung Tab 335. This is the other one. It works perfectly fine. It's also unlocked. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. Next up is the Nokia 6020. This one works perfectly fine and it is also unlocked. This one's also unlocked and this one's also unlocked. Next up, it is the Nokia 5015 Express Music. This one works perfectly fine and it's also unlocked. Next up is the Mantatech 1711. This one works perfectly fine, except the back speaker doesn't work, but the front does. Here's the other Samsung Galaxy S4. This one works perfectly fine, except it is locked to T-Mobile. Or maybe I haven't even checked, but it's with T-Mobile, but it works. Next up is the Nokia 6220 Classic. This one works perfectly fine and it's unlocked. Next up is the Alcatel Tribe. It works perfectly fine except the charging port is broken on this one. Next up is the Nokia N95 8GB. It works perfectly fine. It's a T-Mobile, but it's unlocked. So yeah, pretty nice device. It's in pretty good condition. Next up is the Sony Ericsson W810i. It works perfectly fine and it's unlocked and everything, perfectly working, and it's in pretty good condition. Next up is 182 Nokia Asha 302s. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine. However though, the back cover on this one is broken, but it works. Next up is 182, a Samsung SGH X640. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it is unlocked and everything. Perfectly working. And it's also in pristine condition. Next up is a Nokia 6680. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it is unlocked. And it's with 3. Next up is 182 Samsung Galaxy Go Pluses. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine, and it's also with T-Mobile. Next up is the LG B200. It works perfectly fine, and it's also unlocked. This one's also unlocked pretty much, and yeah. Next up is 182 and Nokia 220s. This is the first one. Unfortunately for this one, it doesn't work. Next up is the HTC Desire S. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. It's a pretty good condition. Next up is the Nokia 6300. Works perfectly fine and it's unlocked and everything. However though, the vibration mode and the camera lens of this one doesn't work. But it works perfectly fine on an dot. Here is the other Motorola V3. This one works perfectly fine and it's unlocked. Here is the other Nokia Asha 302. This one works perfectly fine. This one though is locked. It's actually unlocked, but this one's a T-Mobile. But it works. Next up is the LG Optimus L3. It works perfectly fine, and yeah guys, pretty nice device. Next up is the Nokia C201. It works perfectly fine, and yeah guys, pretty nice device. Next up is the Samsung Galaxy J1. This is the duos version. It works and it's also unlocked. This one is unlocked and also unlocked. Those two right there. Next up is 182 Ace Legacy Force. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine and it's unlocked. Next up is the Akato 2051D. It works perfectly fine and it's also unlocked. Next up is the Blackview A8. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. Next up is the Sony Ericsson T100. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. Next up is the Alcatel One Touch S Pop. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. Next up is a Nokia 2650. This one used to work, but no longer works. And yeah guys, it had contact service. Next up is one of my favorite phones, the Cookie Fresh. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. However though, this one has like a bit of a mess of touchscreen display. Next up is the Alcatel One Touch E257. This one is a closed phone, but the phone is unlocked. It works though. Here is the other Samsung SGH X640. This one also works. So yeah. And here's the last one of the 335 from Samsung. This one works as well. Next up is actually the last one of those 2760s. This one works as well, except the back and both displays don't work. This one used to. So as you can see, it works, and it's also unlocked. And here's the last one on those E250s. This one also works. This is actually the I version, pretty much. Next up is the Maxcom MM134. It works perfectly fine, and it's also unlocked. And here's the other 335. This one's actually unlocked, but it is just missing the back cover only. And actually missing the battery. But yeah, it works. Next up is the 3110T for Nokia, my second phone. It works. And here's the other Samsung mode slider. This one also works. It's also locked. Next up is the Nokia 7250i. It works. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. Except just needs a new battery. Next up is the Sony Xperia J. It works perfectly fine. Next up is the Alcatel 1066G. This one works. And yeah guys, it is pretty much unlocked. Next up is the iPhone 4S. This one works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, I have two of them as well. Next up is the Nokia C101. It works perfectly fine. Next up is the Mandatin 1709. It works perfectly fine and it's also unlocked. Sorry about that. Next up is the Nokia 3310. It works perfectly fine. Next up is the HTC Desire C. It works perfectly fine and it's also unlocked. Next up is the Motorola C118. This was a team. Next up is the Maxon M55. It works perfectly fine and it's also unlocked. And actually all of these actually are unlocked. Next up is the iPhone 5S. It works, it's with EE. And yeah guys, it's also unlocked. Next up is the Nokia 3310. It works. It's also unlocked. This is the 2017 edition and the 3G edition. Next up is the Sony Xperia S, the first phone from Sony. It works. And this is also the first phone from Sony Ericsson. Next up is the Nokia 150. It works perfectly fine. Except the camera on this one doesn't work. And here's the second one of the Galaxy Youngs. But yeah, this one works perfectly fine. Next up is the HTC Desire 200. This one works perfectly fine. It's also unlocked, and this one's also unlocked. Next up is the Alcatel Pixie 4 5.0. This one works. It's also unlocked. Next up is the LG Pop. It works perfectly fine. It's also unlocked. Next up is 182 Nokia C205. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine. And hey guys, pretty nice devices with T-Mobile. Not this one, but the other one is. Next up is the Nokia 1662. This one works perfectly fine, except it's a broken LCD. Yeah. Actually guys, sorry about that. This is actually the last one of the three of them. Sorry about that. Next up is the Vodafone 226 or the Sagen 226X. So works perfectly fine. And it's also unlocked. It was originally passcode locked, but it removed itself. I'm saying that this was also passcode locked, but it bypassed itself. Or actually, I actually bypassed it. Next up is the Nokia 6500 Slide. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it's also unlocked. Next up is 182 Sony Ericsson W595. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine and it's also unlocked. Actually locked. Nokia 2030C, my third phone. It works perfectly fine. So yeah. Next up is the Vodafone 553 or ZTE Smile Q. It works perfectly fine except the digitizer doesn't work. Next up is the Nokia 1100. 182 of them. This one works fine. Next up is the LG Cookie. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, it's also unlocked. Next up is one of my favorite phones, the Nokia N76. It works perfectly fine. And here's the other Sony Ericsson W595. This one doesn't work at all. So yeah. I also removed the only Ericsson logo. Just because I wanted to. And here's the other Nokia C205. This one's actually with T-Mobile. This is the one. It works. It's also unlocked. And here's the other Samsung Galaxy Core Plus. This one has a broken LCD, but the digitizer still works. Here is the other Nokia 220. This one works perfectly fine. It's unlocked, but it just needs a new display. Next up is the LG Optimus. The original version, it works perfectly fine and it's unlocked. Next up is the Nokia 1112. It works perfectly and yeah guys, pretty nice device. Next up is one of my favorite phones, the OneTouch 311. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. It's also unlocked. Next up is the Huawei UA220 or the T-Mobile Pulse. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. And here's the other AC Liquid Z4. This one works perfectly fine. It's also a T-Mobile, and this is also a T-Mobile. Here is the other Nokia 1100. It works as well. Next up is the Samsung Galaxy J5. It works perfectly fine, and it's unlocked. Next up is the Alcatel G5. It works perfectly fine. Next up is 182 Alcatel Pop 4. This is the first one. It works perfectly fine. It's a T-Mobile. Next up is the Nokia 105 2017 edition. It works perfectly fine. Here is the other HTC Desire 100. This one works perfectly fine. The buttons before were broken, now it's fixed. And here's the other iPhone 4S. This one works fine. Next up is the HTC One V. It works perfectly fine. And yeah guys, pretty nice device. Here is a 4-inch version of the Pixie 4. This one also works. It was originally passkey locked and also Google locked, but I bypassed both of them. Next up is the Nokia 685. This one works fine except the flex band. And here's the other Alcatel Pop 4. It also works. It's also a T-Mobile. Just has a cracked lens, but it works. Next up is the Samsung Keystone 3. It works perfectly fine, and it's also unlocked. And same goes to this one, unlocked, all of those, except the other ones. Next up is the Sagem My X2. It works. Next up is the iPhone 6. It works perfectly fine. Next up is the Samsung Omnia. It works. Just needs a new battery. And finally, the HTC Desire 300, which works perfectly fine. It's also unlocked. Unlocked and unlocked as well. And that it is, guys. So that is my updated cell phone collection update as of early December 2019. And yeah guys, so thanks for watching. Like and subscribe and post notifications to never ever miss any of my video guys. And any guys, thanks for watching. Stay for my views guys, and peace out. Goodbye.